Hi guys, welcome to No Problemo. Today I will show you how to use cloth simulations in a little bit more experimental and fun way. We will be using the standard cloth simulation techniques, but adding a few minor changes and a few elements such as physical properties that I will show you in a second to create really strange looking and error generated forms for experimental design. So without further ado, let's go. Okay, once in Blender, we have to do a couple of things. First of all, let's delete all the standard stuff that we won't be using right now. So let's get rid of the camera, let's get rid of the cube, and let's get rid of that light. Now what we will need is a simple plane. So Shift A, Mesh, Plane. Now this square we will divide into several pieces. For those of you that have a powerful computing engine, or a good computer basically, make this into a subdivision of 100. For those of you that don't have a good computer, do a lot less. So what we do is we go into the object. Let's go into edit mode by pressing tab, and we right click and click subdivide. So we choose subdivide. Now we divide this plane into several pieces, or several thousands of pieces, depending on how many subdivisions we will do, or number of cuts. So like I mentioned, those of you that have good computers, you can do around 100. And those of you that have a little bit weaker computers, maybe do like around 20. I will show around 50, just as to not overdo it, and so you won't have to wait too long for the simulation to finish. So let's just do 50 right now. I close this off, tab out, don't need anything else in that edit mode. Right now nothing changed. That's because we have to give it an attribute, or a modifier, which is called the cloth modifier. So we have to have our plane selected. Let's go right here into the modifier properties and do add modifier and cloth. So what we will be using is cloth. Now basically here we're pretty much done in this tab. Let's go down into physics properties. Now here, let's change a few options before we start. Let's do the quality steps to 1. Since this is kind of like a test run, we won't need the maximal quality, or we won't need a high quality as of right now. All the other stuff we can pretty much leave as it is. We will be playing around with the vertex mass, so basically the mass of the actual piece of cloth. What we will need to do is we have to, for right now, we have to hang it from certain points. So kind of like, imagine if you're holding a piece of cloth, or kind of like a piece of cloth, and you hold it by the corners. You can hold it by 2 corners, 3 corners, 1 corner, all 4 corners, or no corner. We can select this by going into from object mode into weight painting. So once we are in weight painting, this is basically the ability to draw a kind of a shape on the surface and have it behave kind of like a element that has been glued to an invisible plane in the sky. So if I draw something like this, and let's do a few points here and here, I leave this setting, or the interaction mode, and go into object mode, and we scroll down here, and we are looking for, if I'm not mistaken, not cache, but shape. So we go into the shape tab, and we go into pin group. Now the pin group has been created automatically because we have been painting in that weight painting mode. So it's kind of like this default pin group. So if I click it, you're going to have group called group. So let's click this one. Basically nothing changed yet because we haven't started simulation. So what we have to do is we have to go down here and look for the play animation, or just press space. So once we press space, ta-da, we have something that looks kind of like our cloth has been hung upon like a, I don't know, a swiggly something. It's hard to describe what it was, but basically the cloth listens to that painting that we did beforehand. So let's just pause this for now. Let's go back, make sure to go back into the first or the 0 frame. And let's go back into object mode. Let's go back into weight painting mode from that object mode. Now, what can we do to clear off all of this painting? We can change our weight of our painting into 0 and start painting over. But of course, we're going to get uneven results. It's going to take quite a while to get this perfectly done. Now, what we can do is basically max out our radius and just draw over all of that non-blue coloring things that show up on that plane. Make sure to put that radius back down. Let's put that weight up in maximum, and let's just select those corners. Now what this does is it allows us to basically have our piece of cloth hang by those corners. Once we do this, we go back into object mode and we can press play. Very simple, nothing fancy. We have a very simply created piece of cloth. Now what we can change is we can go back into those physics tabs and let's play around with that vertex mass. If we increase the mass, it's going to make that cloth go really, not, I guess you can call it soggy, but will make it droop down much more than it's doing right now. So let's do 50 kilograms just to see the difference. Before it was almost a third of a kilogram, so around 300 grams. Now we have 50 kilos. Let's press play, and it actually almost fell off of our blender field. Now what this means is that it's like extremely heavy cloth, which is kind of tensile. I mean, it's like bouncing up and down, so it's not ripping. Maybe 50 is too much. Let's do 5. Now see what happens when I play around with the vertex mass in real time. So what this is doing is this is calculating the whole cloth with the settings that I have chosen right now. So if I change the settings, let's say into 20 kilos, it's going to take it into account in the meantime. Now if you watch carefully, it's just bouncing up and down. Technically, I can change this to like 0.1, and it's going to like bounce back up. So it's reacting to the changes in real time. Of course, once we let one of the passes go completely, it's going to forget about that bounce that we had just now, and it's going to leave it at really, I guess you can call it lightweight piece of cloth, barely hanging in that zero wind, in those zero wind conditions. If we do 0 kilograms, it's gonna be almost flat. It's gonna be kind of like wobbling because of that change. So it's if we do this from the 0 position or the 1 position, and we press play now with the 0 kilograms, it shouldn't move because there are no winds. There is gravity, but this object does not weigh anything at all, so it's not moving. We have no turbulence. We don't have no objects going through that element, so it's basically just floating in the air. What happens if we do a -1? Well, it goes back down to 0 because we can't have negative weights. My proposition is to go to around half a kilo. It's going to give us a little bit more vivid results. So yeah, we have this. Now, what can we do to use this kind of cloth to create something crazy? Well, cloths have this kind of a collision factor that could be implemented, which means that if we were to drop an object or place an object beneath that cloth, then that object would be indented or would go would interact with this cloth. But what if that cloth is interacting with another cloth which is placed intersecting, which physically is not possible because we can't have like two pieces of cloth intersect without having them rip apart and just sew them back together. So this is kind of like a CGI only experience or element that we can do here in Blender. So let's just copy and paste. So copy, Control C, Control V. Let's just copy and move the second plane a little bit over to the side. Doesn't matter how much. What matters is that the planes have to be really close. They can intersect like this one. They can be really close to each other. And let's see what happens if we press play. If we press play, nothing's going to happen. Why? Because we haven't turned on collisions. Now, what's important in collisions is that every single object in the 3D space has its own properties that we can turn on and off. We can turn on gravity and have the object fall down and fall off the limitless plane of the 3D space, the 3D realm. We can have the object be motionless without gravity affecting it, but have its outer shell be of interaction to other object, which means it's called a collision. Basically, it's like my hand. I can touch my hand, my finger stops when touching my hand, which means that my hand and my finger both have collision factors, which means that they can't go through. They're reacting to each other. This is basically something that we can do in Blender, but we have to turn it on beforehand. So we can't have this. It's not standard in terms of Blender. Now, so what we can do and what we should do is for both of these planes, we have to turn on a collision factor. So let's go into the physical properties or physics properties. Let's go into collision and just click this on. So we should have an X right now, right next to it. And same with this one. Click here, collision. Now, what we also have to turn on, or make sure that we have turned on, is we have to scroll down into our collision tab and see if, let's close off all the other tabs because it's going to be kind of crazy soon. Turn off stiffness, we don't need. So we have collision. Yeah, no, we haven't cloth. We have collisions, and we have object collisions, which means that this plane or this cloth is going to interact with other objects that also have collisions turned on. So both of these do, and now we press play. And now we'll see what's going on. What's happening is the first few seconds that the interaction began, there's a kind of like an error in the software which makes the cloths go intervened or intertwined within each other. This is kind of like an error, I guess you can call it, because of like the few seconds that it takes to skip through that object. So basically what we're viewing is we're seeing how two objects are pulling each other apart and also being pulled inside because they have basically the same strength and the same physical properties. And they're kind of like fighting. They're fighting for dominance, and this can go on forever and ever. So this is kind of like an interesting little experiment that we can do in Blender. What we can change is we can change the mass of one of those objects. So let's say this one is gonna have a mass of 1 kilo, and this one's gonna have half a kilo. So let's change this to 1. And we're gonna have a little bit different interactions. This one's slowing down. This one's kind of like fighting a lot more furiously. See this? So this one's like slow and strong. This one's fast and with a lesser strength. What we can use this for is that we can play around basically with different settings. So we can try to have these two planes be intertwining from the beginning, from the let-go basically. So we can use snapping to vertex and just have them snap. Let's turn off the snapping, use the control. Oh, it's not working. Why isn't that working? It's not snapping. I have no idea why. But it's basically going to be the same thing as just having them really, really close to one another. Or just deleting one and just copying and pasting, Control-C, Control-V, the second one over, and just changing the vertex mass back to 0.5 kilo. I think the 0.5 is a little bit more expressive. And so we press play. See that? Just from the get-go, like the first few moments, we're still pulling apart the two cloth elements. And this can go on forever. Of course, our simulation is limited to 250 frames. We can go up to 500, but basically, it's just gonna happen. It's just gonna continue on fighting and creating these crazy shapes. If we were to pause this at a certain point, we can see some funny looking shapes. Now, like this setting is kind of boring, so let's change this up a little bit. So I stopped this to the endpoint of 0. I rotated this by, let's say, 45 degrees. Let's just move this up a little bit and see what happens now. So now we have two very similar points of the corners that haven't been moving. Of course, we have to change one more thing because I forgot that the simulation also has its own information. So the simulation works from frame to frame, and this is changed somewhere here, which I also seemingly forgot where it is. Where are you hiding from me? There we go. So if we go into the cache tab here in the physics properties, we can change the simulation end to finish at 500. So basically, what's gonna do is gonna have we're gonna have those planes keep fighting for around 500 frames. So basically, we have like around, let's say, 50 frames per second. So this is gonna be around 10 seconds of fighting, constant fighting. Now we have to do this for both of them. So I changed it only for one. Let's change it for the second one as well. Let's start it over. And like I mentioned, they're gonna be fighting the whole time. So this is kind of like a weird battle of the cloths. We can also, of course, add more cloths. This is gonna make the cloths, of course, fight even more. It might take up more of your CPU because this is rendered on CPU, so on your processor. So be wary of the fact that the more objects we have, the more computing power it takes for them to calculate properly. Now, once we have gone through a couple of those settings and we find that one of them looks pleasing enough, so maybe we can find one of those frames. This object can be freezed in this position by going back into our cloth modifiers and we click apply. And we do this for both of them. Apply. Apply. We can actually delete the collision and we won't be using it anymore. So we go back into the physics. We undo that collision. So we close the collision options. And now we can play around with making this smoother, with playing around with the actual shape. So we can go into, let's say, subdivision surface for both of them. And have them smooth out and see what kind of crazy different shape we created with using errors in Blender. And then of course we have the rendering, we have compositing, we can use some crazy materials for our shapes and for our designs. But basically we've created kind of a structure, maybe even a sculpture, which is created through math. It is created through a kind of a law of physics that has been kind of broken and been used to basically massacre the rendering engine from Blender and the cloth physics engine in Blender to create a kind of crazy and neat looking shape. This is of course is limitless, so the amount of options and amount of inputs and outputs is vast. So we can change these shapes, and the moment we change that slider one frame from the left or to the right, it's gonna change the whole object. So basically, it's what we change in those settings is basically what we're gonna get ish. So this is something that we have to play around with to find a nice looking output. I think that's it for today's video. If you found this entertaining and helpful, let me know. If there's something that I should be aware about in terms of these experimental Blender settings, let me know as well. So thank you, and have a good one, and see you in some future videos. Bye-bye.